Scarce building material leads to many lacking homes, and cities being unable to properly ensure the safety of their citizens. We believe it would be best to focus on constructing our cities before prioritizing personal equipment. Therefore, I believe we should select both wood and stone. If only one, I think stone would be best. She was one of the D grades from the top 10 that hadn't drawn that much attention yet. Jake had told Miranda she was exactly level 100, having clearly just evolved, but that still meant she was one of the stronger people present. Jake had mentioned that she felt weak, though, so Miranda doubted she had achieved the perfect evolution. "Do you need tall walls so the warriors can stand firm and make no beast come near?" the man in fur countered, looking a bit annoyed that he wasn't instantly offered the same support that Miranda had gained. "Your axe will not place a roof over anyone's head if you spend all day slaying beasts and not chopping wood," the woman said, clearly also annoyed. The discussion continued for a while, others frequently adding their opinions, and it quickly became clear that at least either wood or stone would be chosen. Now the choice was which one. Jake looked wholly uninterested, and quite frankly, Miranda didn't care much either. Haven was already somewhat strapped for credits, so it wasn't like they were going to buy a lot, and pretty much all resources chosen would benefit the citizens in some way. Philip would love ores and metals for the large smithy at the fort. Haven had many woodworking professions, and a source of high-quality stone was always welcome for construction. Again, the same held true for everything. It quickly became obvious that the other cities didn't have the same opinion, however. Jacob the Augur didn't engage this time. He instead had the trade manager advocate for both stone and wood, noting that foodstuffs surely had to be another valuable option if they could only get one. A few tried to question if herbs were truly necessary, but Miranda found that other forces also supported it, and not just to kiss ass. Herbs were generally harder to get than most other resources, and most settlements had at least some alchemists. Even if they didn't, many cooks or other types of artisans could still use herbs. This ignored that some herbs were also beneficial to just eat raw. They mostly functioned as suboptimal healing or mana potions, but they were better than nothing. In the end, the proposition to quickly decide what shops to get turned out not to be that quick. Chapter 16. World Congress. Confrontations. Jake had always liked to play strategy games, mainly those of the good old 4X genre. 4X was an abbreviation of Explore, Expand, Exploit, and Exterminate, and featured, in 90% of cases, macro gameplay and economics in a leading role. While they weren't the most realistic, he and Casper had spent many hours nerding out over making optimal builds and strategies, and one of the most important factors was always location. In these games, the resources you had available were nearly entirely dependent on the starting location. In any given session, you might start near valuable metals or expensive crystals, a forest for logging, or a seaside with great fishing possibilities. The placement of the pylons was a bit of the same. Most, if not all, citizens preferred to be within the scope of the pylon for obvious reasons. It increased experience gain for non-combat related activities, and the city lord also wanted it for all their skills to work properly. This meant that unless you had valuable resources extremely close by, you would have to travel outside of the safety of the city to get them, something very few liked to do. There was always the risk of some high-level asshole bird descending and killing you, or some huge earthworm suddenly coming up and gobbling you down. Haven, as an example, had a mine placed within the area of the city with some ores and metals. Perhaps a few gems and crystals, too, but nothing worth writing home about, and far from enough to call it a strategic resource. According to Miranda, they had already spent all the metal they'd mined, so it wasn't like getting more would be bad. There was plenty of wood to go around, being placed in a forest and all, with stones also aplenty, primarily because they didn't feel the need to expand senselessly. Jake was already fairly confident that they wouldn't lack monster material. Again, forest, and fruits and foodstuffs they also had plenty of. Heck, even herbs weren't that hard to get, and Jake had collected a few during his hunts deeper into the forest. But it still took time, and most herbs he found had unknown uses. As far as Jake knew, Haven outright lacked some materials, such as chemicals and cloth. Due to them having nearly nothing natively, Haven would be fine with all the offered materials except for wood or anything from monsters, as at least they had those. As it was, they kind of needed everything, but didn't severely need anything, except for herbs. because Jake wanted that. The same wasn't true for other cities. Sankt Domo appeared to lack nearly everything due to their large population, but apparently had plenty of gems and crystals. Other cities had one or two resources that they all seemed adamant on not needing a store for. All of this was to say, no one could fucking agree on anything. Jake really wanted to just leave or go chat with one of his many acquaintances present, but that was a bit hard with all the borderline yelling going on between the city lords. It would also just be rude to tell Miranda, Neil, and Lillian to leave the platform for him to invite friends over, so Jake had to wait. The only positive thing was that you really got a good feel for the other cities based on this entire thing. A quick discussion so we can move on to other things ended up taking nearly 2 hours, leaving only a single hour remaining before the actual vote would begin. Jake wasn't even sure any definite agreement was reached. It just sounded like people would vote for their own thing. A massive waste of time. Everything except for the first 5 minutes, where everyone agreed on herbs, that is. Finally free, Jake considered if he should go over and ask the undead a bit more about how their stats now worked, but he noticed a figure approaching before he could do that. He was from one of the lower-ranking cities and was a person Jake recognized by aura over appearance. It was the sleek-looking man with a bloodline. He had deep brown eyes with what looked like a small flame burning within, and his gaze seemed to pick up something no one else could perceive. Jake felt uncomfortable under his stare, like his eyes bored into his body, and he was certain of one thing. The man had a perception-based skill like himself. At least it had aspects that allowed him to see something. No, it wasn't a skill. It was his bloodline. What does he see? Jake wondered as the man got closer. The man's eyes flickered between Jake's chest and face as an intrigued smile adorned his face. Pleasure to meet you, Hunter. I am Aaron. He extended a hand towards Jake. Jake looked at him for a bit. Miranda and the two others stood uncomfortably behind him, not sure what to do or say. Before Miranda had a chance to come to the rescue, Jake just smiled and shook his hand. Nice to meet you, Patriarch, Jake said, his voice infused with a bit of will to make it harder for anyone but Aaron to hear it. It wasn't foolproof, and Miranda and the others still heard it, as well as anyone using a skill or technique to snoop, but it was good enough to mask it for the casual listener. As for why he'd used that term, Aaron returned his smile with an even larger one of his own. A rarity, those like us. It would be my pleasure to host you in the city of Cardius if you find the time and wish to speak further. I believe we have much to learn from one another, and it would be my honor. You have a certain spark in you. The last words were said a bit weirdly, and Jake squinted. I'll think about it, he said, honestly just wanting the creepy guy gone. He got the heebie-jeebies from him, but he also got another strange emotion. Everything within Jake was telling him that the man, Aaron, wasn't a danger to him. He was a D-grade, and he did have a certain aura to him, but it was far from enough to threaten Jake. Yet Jake felt like if they fought, they couldn't win. It was an odd feeling. He somehow sensed that fighting the man would be a meaningless endeavor. He kind of wanted to try fighting all the D-grades present just to try and battle a fellow human at D-grade. All except for Aaron. Odd indeed. Aaron, hearing Jake's tentative affirmation, just smiled once more and nodded. Know that you are welcome. He looked at Jake's face. Not his eyes, but face. Or perhaps what was on it. Both of you. With those words, he walked off, leaving a frowning Jake behind. Casper stood with his eyes closed, ignoring the entire discussion about what resources to get and all that. He knew his opinion wouldn't add any value, and he would rather spend his time focusing on something more important, such as talking with his ghost girlfriend. Your friends seem nice, Lyra said, her voice echoing in his head. They had tried and discovered that Lyra couldn't be summoned inside the World Congress, much to the annoyance of Priscilla and the schadenfreude of Casper. He didn't want to put her out there just because Priscilla wanted to flex their strength a bit. Lyra had evolved to D-grade a week or so before the World Congress and was already damn strong for one her level. Her blight magic was damn intense, and she seemed to like fighting, which was a relief to Casper. They had even worked on ways for her to help enhance his traps to have better synergy in the future. While it was expected that someone of the enlightened species was stronger than monsters, it wasn't a rule, far from it. Priscilla didn't like to admit it, But Lyra was stronger than her in pretty much every way when it came to a straight-up confrontation. Her race was incredibly powerful, and something equally important was something Casper hadn't even considered. She was practically immortal. As long as the locket existed, she would always be able to reform her body. The locket itself contained at least parts of her soul. To be honest, Casper wasn't sure exactly how it worked. He was just happy that his girlfriend would be safe in most circumstances. A bit like a lich, actually. It was weird how an item could be both functional equipment and essentially the body of a living creature. He had been warned that certain soul-affecting attacks could still hurt her, and that she was even a bit susceptible to them due to her state, but it wasn't something they had to worry about against regular beasts. Even if he didn't care overly much about this whole negotiation, Priscilla and the others were sure going at it. They didn't really need stone, but actually really wanted wood. Many trees couldn't grow within their area or wouldn't last long, and they hoped that the store would have types of wood fit for areas with high death affinity. He himself desired some gems and crystals, but he wasn't desperate. They were for his profession as a dungeon engineer, and he needed many crystals, gems, and other energy sources to power stuff. Casper was called a dungeon engineer, but that didn't mean he could actually make dungeons, at least not yet. He could make certain areas with desired properties, and with his class as a cursed trapper, he could make some damn nice defensive fortifications. Together with Lyra, they had taken down quite a few D grades already. Well, Casper had taken them down alone after she reached D grade, after which she just kept close to keep him safe. It hurt his experience gain a lot, and wasn't great for his records either, but he saw that as a small sacrifice to spend more time with her. Yeah, they're good people, he replied. Communicating telepathically with her had been a lot easier than he thought, and it helped him to not look ridiculous by standing there and talking to himself. But your friend Jake is a bit, how do I say it, unsettling. I felt like he knew I was listening, Lyra said, a bit unsure. Wouldn't surprise me. Also, can I point out how funny it is that a ghost is scared of a human and not the other way around? I'm not scared. I said unsettled, not scared. Jeez. If anyone is scary, it is that Augur. I feel like half of his words somehow touch my soul or something. I don't think we should interact too much with him, at least not too frequently, and only in small doses. I have a feeling that kind of passive mental magic can seriously affect someone. True. I don't think Jacob would do anything on purpose, but better safe than sorry. It also isn't like people can't change, and I wouldn't have thought Caroline able to do what she did, so I guess I am not the best judge of character. They kept talking for a while, mainly discussing non-World Congress-related topics. It was soothing, and they did have to touch a bit upon some sad facts of reality. This would likely be the last time Casper could meet this casually with Jacob and quite a few others. The political stage had yet to form into circles and alliances, but more defined lines would begin separating the factions once that was established, and there was no way the undead and the Holy Church would ever be in an official alliance. They were only interrupted when the talks died down and people began wandering. Casper didn't think about going anywhere, as his attention was still grabbed by the confrontation many had looked forward to. Progenitor versus Sword Saint. Jake stood before the man as they looked each other in the eyes. Quite a few other parties, including the Holy Church, were interested to see what would come of this, as the two had just stood there for a good 5 seconds now. Blue eyes, deep as the ocean, stared into beastly, soul-piercing eyes. Their gazes could nearly not be any more different, yet they both held the same challenging intent. At the same time, they raised their arms to shake hands, both giving a good squeeze. The old man winced as they both let go, while Jake smiled triumphantly. He'd won out in pure strength. He could see in the Sword Saint's eyes, and knew for himself, that if not for the rules of the World Congress, the old man would have drawn his sword, and he would have summoned his bow at this very moment. Sadly, there were rules, and this wasn't the time or place for a fight between what were likely the two strongest humans on Earth. The Nubberud clan wishes to enter a formal non-aggression pact with Haven, with the goal of a true alliance, the Sword Saint spoke, finally breaking the silence with curt words no one had expected him to say. I do not believe our two cities have any reason to fight. We can discuss more personal arrangements for the future at a later time. What say you? Sure, Jake agreed. You can have your people discuss it with my people. We are in agreement then. Pleasure meeting you, the old man said, as he bowed and moved away. Jake returned the nod, ending their second interaction the same as the first. This interaction had been brief but impactful. Many eyes had been on them, some of them hoping for the two to enter an actual conflict. And while Jake would love to have a fight, he didn't see any reason to involve Haven or the other guys' cities. Jake also had a feeling that they would get their chance eventually, even if a vast distance separated them. And quite frankly, while Jake was vain, he wasn't silly enough to spend so much time traveling to another city just to fight an old man. At least, not before he got faster. Jake wasn't sure what to do with the rest of the time before the next vote, and just returns to his seat on their platform. Everyone else was gone again, Miranda and Lillian having taken the chance to talk to the representatives from Saya, and Neil chatting with some space mage woman from a lower-ranking city. With a mental command, he obscured the platform and took the mask off his face. He stared down at the wooden mask. It looked entirely the same as the day he'd gotten it, but he knew it was not. Things had changed. During his race evolution, it had absorbed some of the weird energy in that space, and he had a feeling that while it increased his mana regeneration, it also constantly pulled in energy for itself. "Hey, Villy, what?" Jake began, but instantly felt something was wrong. He closed his eyes and focused, and only noticed now that he couldn't feel that small, subtle connection he usually felt. He also only now discovered that he couldn't feel the Viper's presence at all. Usually he just zoned out the occasional peek the god took, but he hadn't peeked for this entire World Congress, and it turned out it had been because he couldn't. All connection to outside sources, at least divine sources, appeared to be cut off while inside this weird World Congress space. I guess that means all the other factions are cut off too. Good riddance. It was good to know that this entire World Congress in actuality wasn't a bunch of gods discussing with mouthpieces. It was also once more proof that the system was the real OG on the power scale. That it could fully cut off the connection like that so flawlessly was quite a power play. Anyway, what he wanted to ask Villy was pretty simple, so he decided to ask the one other person on the platform with him. He looked down at the mask once more. "So, do you think I could beat you now?" Jake got no response, but he was sure the king was there, still alive. Aaron had seen something, it had taken energy, the description had slightly changed, and Jake couldn't wait for a proper rematch. Of course, it was entirely possible he had misread the situation, but one could always hope. Chapter 17. World Congress, on the flip of a coin. The second vote quickly approached its end, and by now there was quite a bit of nervousness going around. The last hour had contained plenty of closed-door deals and under-the-table agreements on what to vote for. Miranda told Jake that she and Lillian had gone to reaffirm the vote for herbs with those who'd promised it before. She even went as far as making binding system agreements with them, not allowing them just to make empty promises. With the many votes of Haven, and at least a few from some of the other top 10 ones, herbs was pretty much secured as one of the chosen options. Honestly, no one was sure what the other options would be, but wood and stone had apparently become less popular over the last hour. This was due to the ability to sell to other cities using the store, and the different factions had begun just making deals with those who had plenty of a particular resource. Of course, there was the issue that you couldn't sell to designated buyers based on the description of the store, but it would at least mean some wood or stone was up for sale. Haven would likely sell some wood too, logging from around the outskirts of the forest towards the fort. They didn't want to ruin the city of Haven itself, but no one really cared about the outskirts closer to the fort. All it would do was make less forest between the fort and Haven, and there was plenty of forest to take from, more than they could possibly log for many years. There were some worries, though, such as, what did the system consider an item, or a material? Many types of wood apparently weren't identifiable without some mild processing or until transformed into an item, just like some herbs and fruits didn't register as an item before they matured. Could you just throw a pile of trees into the store? How would the system communicate what you were selling? He was also aware that he didn't have full information on this. Identify only worked on items you could actually identify, like how he couldn't identify herbs back before becoming an alchemist. Miranda also hadn't seen the properties of herbs before she got some general appraising skill from magical catalysts from her class that allowed her to identify some herbs. On a side note, everyone could apparently identify stuff like equipment or consumables, but the details varied. Like how Jake could see how much a potion would restore and others couldn't, and how a blacksmith could see details if identifying a weapon or armor. The only ones that could kind of identify everything were merchants. According to Miranda, rather than an identify skill, they often got it upgraded or received a similar new skill called appraisal or something like that. It made sense to Jake, as a merchant kind of had to know what the hell he was handling. Actually, would merchants be able to do something special with the system store? Maybe some additional options? An easier way to sell items? All of these were questions Jake was glad he didn't have to really think about, outside of interesting consideration about what an item was. He could just ask Miranda or someone else about it after the fact. Jake had also considered if he should try and flex some potions and promise to put some up for sale if everyone voted for herbs. But he didn't really want to put himself out there like that. He would also seriously need to commission some more bottles soon. He'd had Miranda give him back quite a few, and she had even scrounged up some additional ones from a merchant, but Jake still needed a lot. He had this bad habit of sometimes throwing and breaking poison or potion bottles after drinking them. Will potion bottles be a part of gems and crystals, or maybe stone? Jake wondered. Grass was made from sand, and sand was technically small, annoying, underwear-invading stones, which begged another question. Were they even made of glass? He didn't actually know. Maybe it was just some special kind of crystal. As these thoughts passed through his head, Neil entered the barrier, and Jake also noticed that the vote for the system store would begin in around 5 minutes. Jake nodded at Neil, then asked, "Any progress on getting some teleportation network up and running?" Neil looked a bit surprised that the unmasked Jake had asked, then smiled.
"A bit, but it isn't easy. We need to properly link things up, which will require us to travel to other cities and set them up as it is now. We are hoping to find a way to sync them up without having to travel."
"How would that work?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. He loved figuring out how all the magic stuff worked. Neil was clearly happy to see someone interested.
It is a bit like finding a radio frequency that we can tap into, one not currently used. You can say that the usual space we occupy is the stable wavelength, and any deviations to it result in spatial distortion. Space magic, as I understand it, is basically just fiddling with the frequency in a localized area. So, what we are trying to do is to create matching spatial radios of sorts, all running on the exact same wavelength to make the entire journey between the two stable. We need it to be a frequency that is also properly compressed and warps the space between the two locations, like that old movie trope where the science guy folds a piece of paper in half and pokes a pencil through. We need to make sure the frequency properly bends the paper, and then for the teleportation to poke the hole with whatever we transport on the edge of the pencil.
Wait, won't you need those spatial radios, as you call them, to be able to differ in frequency depending on where you want to go? Jake asked. And what if that space is distorted by other means during travel? Neil just looked at him for a few moments. The surprise on his face from Jake actually having listened was palpable.
"It is indeed a challenge. Outside interference isn't really that big of a deal, as we can stabilize it, so unless another expert messes with it or someone booby-traps the teleportation circle, the teleportation itself should be safe and 100% reliable. You were also right that the teleportation circles will need to link up to each other. Luckily, we think we have found a solution to that.
Do tell.
We will use the system store to sell items with spatial signatures imprinted on them, as well as confidential codes only known and understandable by us space mages. It will take a while, but with it we should be able to establish a good network of participating cities. This does require the teleportation circles to be absolutely stable, and they cannot be moved around after being established and linked. Luckily, planets heavily stabilize the frequency of space, but we will still need regular maintenance for the circles to not have them desync due to the planet moving and stuff like that."
"Well, sounds like you have quite the task ahead of you." Jake chuckled. "How will you power the circles?"
"Yeah, that is another issue. The circles will require a lot of spatial mana to work, more dependent on the distance. It will also get more expensive as the strength of the person being teleported increases. By the way, these teleportation circles aren't our inventions at all, but common knowledge in the multiverse, confirmed by how we pretty much all have the same understanding based on the study resources we had access to. I still have quite a few books stored in the orb."
Neil was getting sidetracked. Jake already knew these teleportations weren't their invention, as so many damn books he'd read talked about them as being regular business across the multiverse. Didn't answer my question. How will you power it? Jake asked again.
Right. To begin with, it will absolutely require one of us space mages being present to power it, and even then it will require consumables. If gems and crystals get voted for, there might be usable energy sources there, but it is honestly a big maybe, as items with space affinity are rare. No, it makes more sense for us to make it such that regular mana can be transformed into space mana to power the circle, but that will take a while to get up and running. Even then, it will result in it needing even more maintenance, as these catalysts to transform mana will wear out quickly. Again, this is how it is often done throughout the multiverse in the early stages of these networks. There are better ways, but they will take even longer and even more power to get up and running. Of course, if we suddenly had a B-grade space mage, he could just toss up super advanced circles running on atmospheric mana and tap into high-level concepts to power it, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Sounds like you have a major task ahead of you, a female voice said. Miranda and Lillian entered the barrier, making Neil look a bit embarrassed. He was really getting into it, and Jake found it quite interesting. Sadly, the time to vote was approaching, but, more importantly, "Hey, that's what I said," Jake said, cracking a smile.
Great minds think alike.
Miranda smiled before turning a bit more serious.
I have done what I can, and I believe herbs should be locked down, but it would still be risky for us not to pour our votes into it. Based on the talks, I also strongly believe that ore and metal will be voted in. As for the last option, it is honestly up in the air. I reckon it will still be stone or wood, though I did hear some talk of foodstuffs in some of the rapidly expanding settlements.
Lillian pitched in.
Food has a lot of value in regenerating resources faster. People still have to eat a bit. I can't talk about D grade, but even at E grade, we can't go entirely without food.
Jake had to admit he had barely thought of food as one of the things that could possibly get voted for. There was so much to find, and people needed far less. Yet people still needed a little. Jake had just never noticed it. Did he really get his fill from herbs and stuff? Actually, about the time he stopped eating as many herbs, Miranda had begun bringing him food. Was he really just a spoiled brat who got all the food handed to him on a platter? Literally?
I guess I shouldn't judge others like that, and I am sure chefs and cooks can make some awesome stuff. If not, they wouldn't get their own entire profession. The food Miranda brings is also godly. If foodstuffs was voted in, maybe they could make even better things and level faster. Haven needs a D-grade chef sooner rather than later.
Anyway, the timer slowly ticked down, and by now everyone had returned to their own platforms. Nearly all of them were fully obscured as the factions went through a last-second discussion on what to vote for. Voting has begun. Please distribute your votes. Votes remaining, 10 of 10. Time to vote, 4 minutes 59 seconds. Options for store offerings. 1. Herbs. 2. Ore. Jake stopped reading there and poured all 10 votes into herbs. Miranda, Lillian, and Neil did the same, then just waited and made some small talk to pass the time. He felt somewhat nervous about herbs possibly not being voted for, as it was really the only option he cared about. Should I have done more to convince people? No, put trust in Miranda. You would have just made things worse. The vote for the limited system store has concluded. Voting breakdown, ordered based on the number of votes received. 1. Ores and metals.
You gotta be fucking kidding me. I swear to fucking Billy, I will...
2. Herbs.
Okay, all good. Whew.
3. Stone.
So, stone won out, eh?
3. Fruit, grain, and other foodstuffs.
Wait, what?
2 threes. 4. Wood. 5. Mixed monster leather, hides, and bones. 6. Cloth, thread, and other textiles. 7. Gems and crystals. 8. Chemicals. 9. Mixed monster body parts, meat, and innards.
Does 2 threes mean there is a tie? Wait, doesn't that mean...
The vote has resulted in a tie. The highest-ranking noble shall function as the tiebreaker. The highest-ranking noble present is the Earl from Haven, who will have 10 minutes to decide.
This isn't all good anymore.
Not at all. As the high-ranking noble, it is your privilege and responsibility to take charge during a political impasse. You must exercise your power and choose either fruit, grain, and other foodstuffs, or stone as the third resource to enter the limited system store. Time to choose, 9 minutes 57 seconds. Warning, if you fail to select, the decision will default to the second highest-ranking noble present, chosen based on who obtained the Viscount's title first.
Well, fuck me.
Jake was the only one that could read the last few system messages, which had followed the news that the decision was now up to him, and he felt it. Every single fucking pair of eyes turned his way, and the damn barrier was always made see-through just as a vote ended, making everyone look straight at him. He wanted to make it obscure him, but he grit his teeth as he prepared himself for what was coming.
Excuse me, sir, I believe, for the sake of, I implore you to...
A dozen voices spoke up, all directed towards Jake to try and make him choose their preferred option. Jake found it all a tad overwhelming, but kept his cool. He focused on the mask on his face and the fact that he was the one in charge here. But more importantly, he chose to believe in the person he had appointed city lord. Jake raised his hand to silence everyone. Saya, the city of the Sword Saint, the undead, Saint Domo, the court, and many of the other major factions hadn't said anything. It was mainly all the smaller factions. Soon, everyone quieted down as Jake spoke. Let's do this fairly. With a motion, a small item appeared in his hand, a coin. He noticed a few people's eyes go wide. His brother made a big grin on his platform, one mirrored by Jacob, Casper, Bertram, and even the Sword Saint, who clearly found his decision amusing. Jake placed the coin in his hand and, with a flick, tossed it into the air. It spun at incredible speed before it landed on top of his hand, where it was instantly covered by his other hand. He looked out into the hall and spotted a random city lord from one of the lower-ranking cities. You there. If you're right, stone. If you're wrong, foodstuffs. Choose. Heads or tails. The poor city lord took a few moments to notice he was talking to her, and all the attention switched her way. She was clearly surprised to be put on the spot, but managed to collect herself as she asked, "How do I know you aren't doing some trick?" She clearly didn't want to choose. You don't, and I don't care what you think. If I wanted, I could just pick a random one myself. So, heads or tails? She stood there, hesitating, before Jake just shook his head and looked to her neighbor, another low-ranking noble. You then, heads or tails? The man looked a bit more assured as he shrugged, gladly playing along. Perhaps he didn't care that much himself. Heads, I guess. Jake smiled as he lifted his hand and revealed the coin. Tails. Foodstuffs it is. He didn't even give the objections time to come. He chose it, and the system notification went out to everyone. Voting for the limited system store has concluded. The store will include an assortment of ores and metals, herbs and fruit, grain, and other foodstuffs. The store will be available upon the conclusion of the World Congress. Jake heard a few yells of people claiming it was unfair and other silly objections, but he didn't care. Nothing was fairer than a coin flip. Sure, it would have been cheating if he'd picked himself with his intuition, which was why he'd made someone else pick. Still, the complaints annoyed him. Miranda had even given him an approving smile, so it couldn't be that bad. Luckily, the next system message quickly came to make people shut up. The third and final vote of the World Congress will pertain to the upcoming system event to help the enlightened races of Earth. Chapter 18. World Congress. System events. System events are exactly as the name suggests. Events put on by the system itself, the Malefic Viper had explained to Jake long ago. More often than not, they offer great rewards, but equally great risks. Well, as a new universe, you may get some safer versions. Events can be pretty much anything, and are great ways to challenge yourself and achieve a breakthrough to the next level for many mortals, and even gods. They can even offer things one cannot find out in the multiverse. As I told you, I got my bloodline through an event, so that should put things into perspective. They can also offer titles, items, and all sorts of things. I wouldn't count on any events you experience in your early days to offer anything uberly great, as I have yet to hear of any bloodline-granting events for anyone below C-grade. Also, as your events will likely be of the safer variant, it won't offer the best there is. Danger and opportunity are intrinsically linked, after all. Actually, the tutorial had been considered a system event, though still special even by system event standards. Jake was certain most, if not all, factions related to higher powers were aware of these things. At least, he saw their eyes light up at the mention of a system event, and most seemed to nearly instantly forgive and forget his coin-flipping antics. The third and final vote of the World Congress will pertain to the upcoming system event to help the enlightened races of Earth. All system events will primarily feature combat, and any participants are advised to recognize this. All events will offer unique rewards and opportunities. Options for the system event. 1. Tournament, singles. 2. Tournament, groups. 3. Town defense. 4. Treasure hunt. 5. Event dungeons. The tournaments will include both battles against monsters as well as other enlightened beings of Earth. If singles are chosen, the battles will primarily consist of 1 versus 1 fights between monsters and enlightened ones, while groups will include group battles and larger combat scenarios against monsters. The monsters will be rare variants from across the multiverse, both powerful and valuable. Groups can consist of up to 10 members. For singles, all rewards will be given individually, while for groups it will be split evenly among group members. The town defense event will see the enlightened beings of Earth in a city of old, and they will have to defend it from ever-increasing waves of invading monsters. Every pylon will be granted their own minor settlement to defend. However, an alliance of up to 5 pylons may be established before the event and allow them only to defend a single city instead. The invaders will carry much bounty for you to claim. All rewards will be split among the defenders, partly based on contributions. The event dungeons will offer 3 distinct dungeons that can be challenged in parties of up to 5, and 2 challenge dungeons that can only be attempted by individuals. Rewards will be split according to standard dungeon rules, with a final reward given depending on overall performance. The treasure hunt will see the participants travel to a foreign land filled with treasures to be unearthed and discovered, or hidden away by a lost civilization in their safest and well-defended chambers. Beat challenges and claim your spoils. During the treasure hunt, the participants will encounter other creatures attempting to claim the items, as well as the ever-present threat of the other enlightened ones and the environment itself. The treasure hunt will be entered individually, and all rewards are individually earned. All events will take a total of 10 days and will begin in 3 months, 90 days. Beware that death is a risk, but all participants will have the possibility of surrendering and exiting any ongoing event at the cost of a reduced reward. All participants must be D grade or above, or be granted an exception to participate by the system. Anyone who meets the requirements to participate will be given an invitation upon initiation of the chosen system event. 3 days after the chosen event concludes, there will be an auction where the participants and cities may auction off their spoils, as well as any other valuables they hold. More details regarding the auction will come after the conclusion of the system event. Only one option may be chosen. Voting will begin in 3 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. It was a massive notification, and everyone in the entire hall was silent for a moment as they all took it in. Jake also carefully took it all in, already considering what option he liked the most. Actually, it was a bit like when he was choosing skills. 5 options, too. Of course, the difference here was that he would have to discuss it with a massive group of other interested parties. Miranda didn't hesitate as she obscured their platform, and just in time, as Jake saw many other factions do the same. There were a few that didn't, but the vast majority did. They needed to discuss the new information and reach an internal consensus. Thoughts? Miranda asked openly. I think the solo tournament would be best for Haven, Lillian said, being the practical person she was. We don't have a lot of powerful groups besides Neil's party, and most of the other events seem more catered towards groups. However, if it is purely solo battles, I believe we have the strongest person on Earth. There was just one issue with that. No thanks, Jake answered, shaking his head. A tournament honestly just sounded boring. Besides a handful of the people present, he didn't see anyone even capable of putting up an entertaining fight. The Sword Saint and maybe 1 or 2 others could likely offer a good bout, so the entire tournament would just be him fighting monsters. And while that did sound quite entertaining, he liked many of the other options more. Lillian looked a bit confused, but Miranda seemed to understand his thoughts as she nodded in acknowledgement. I think town defense would be the worst option for us, she said. That event seems heavily focused on the power of cities as a whole, and Haven simply isn't big enough for that to seem like a good idea. Also, the rewards seem to be heavily biased towards large parties, and even if one has an exemplary performance, they will very likely have to share a lot of the bounty with others. As Haven is more focused on singular, powerful individuals, that entire option seems like a bad idea. Jake agreed. Also, it said waves, which likely meant hordes, which meant a lot of busy work killing weaker enemies. I am personally leaning towards dungeons or that treasure hunt, Jake said. While Haven already had a D-grade dungeon close by, that wasn't the part of the event he focused on. It was the two challenge dungeons. Jake had only ever been in one challenge dungeon, and that had awarded him his current profession and put him on the path of the Malefic Viper. It had been a major turning point for his progress and an invaluable experience. The gains outside of the profession were also good for a dungeon you couldn't even be level 10 to enter, having provided stat-gaining items, that mural that gave 10 willpower, and, of course, the entire garden and living area he'd cleaned up. Oh, and on top of it all, he'd even gained usual dungeon awards, aka the spatial necklace and fabulous boots. He wouldn't discount the regular dungeons either. If they gave loot similar to that of the tutorial, he would come out with quite a haul if he managed to clear just 2 of them during the 10 days. It was all a gamble, of course, but he should be able to make solid progress, considering his relative strength compared to the rest of the planet. The other option he liked was the treasure hunt. Why? Well, it was in the name. Jake liked treasures, and he liked hunting. How could he not like an event centered around hunting down treasures? Moreover, he felt like he was quite suited for it. He had hunter's tracking, sense of the Malefic Viper, and an insanely high perception stat. Not to mention all the benefits from his bloodline, such as improved intuition, his danger sense when breaking into well-defended chambers, and his sphere of perception, which had grown immensely since his evolution. If anyone was good at finding cool stuff and getting to it, he felt like it was him. Also, of all the options, treasure hunt seemed the most open. The rest looked way more regulated, with set challenges to overcome. Based on the description, the treasure hunt would be an area perhaps a bit like the tutorial, allowing those who truly stood out to exemplify themselves. That meant Jake could spend the entire 10 days going for the good stuff and not waste the first few days slogging through the easy parts. Heck, it even mentioned competing with other humans and the Risen, so he would even get a chance to test his mettle against the other powerhouses of Earth. Out of all the options, he also felt like it synergized best with the subsequent auction. Thinking about it, the idea of an auction was quite interesting, especially considering it would be in 3 months. With a system store now available for at least a while, many would be able to craft more and better stuff than ever before, and surely they would save the best for the auction. Jake voiced his opinion to the others, as well as his reasoning. They seemed to get it, but Miranda did have a point of concern. Based on the rules, there is nothing stopping factions from grouping up during the treasure hunt. While the minimum requirement of D-grade will mean you can't enter with an army, I can still see most of the major factions entering with quite a group in 3 months. Haven won't have as many, so we may be outmanned severely and be taken advantage of. I am very confident Eleanor, Kristen, Levi, Silas, and I will achieve D-grade for the event, Neil chimed in. Me too, but that will still leave us severely behind pretty much every faction besides some of the smaller ones, Miranda said, shaking her head. You are only making it sound more enticing, Jake said with a toothy smile. While I can empathize with you guys being ganged up on, I personally welcome it. Besides, I doubt they will dare grouping up on me. The system said death is still a risk. Yeah, but needlessly killing anyone will be a diplomatic disaster, Miranda said, shaking her head again. If they try to start shit, it isn't needless. While I would prefer not to have to, I am not averse to making a few examples. Jake mirrored her shaking head. He truly didn't want to kill humans if he could avoid it, as he knew how complicated it was. It was the same reason he tried to avoid killing even invaders like Abby and Donald. But just like Abby and Donald, he wouldn't hesitate to kill if he decided it was necessary. Jake still vividly remembered the ambush that had nearly killed him back in the tutorial. If he were ever put in a similar spot, he wouldn't hesitate to kill every single fucking person involved, consequences be damned. If he were worried that there would be retaliation, Jake would just rely on the nugget of wisdom from the Viper, become strong enough for them not to dare and try anything. Of course, he knew that as humans, they were emotional creatures and didn't always act logically, but the stronger one gets, the more they tend to value their lives. Well, Jake was a hard exception to that, considering the near suicidal behavior he was still willing to exhibit if he could get a good fight. Just don't overdo it, and tell me if you kill a scion or some faction or the son of a city lord or something like that, Miranda answered. She looked like she knew she couldn't convince him otherwise, and she was right. I don't think most factions will try anything either. Is it really worth the risk to attack those from Haven? Jake asked, trying to convince her. Not with you around, no, but the rest of us? Well, some might still be rebuffed, Just as many won't care. Anyway, dungeons or treasure hunt? Got it. Which one would you prefer? Treasure hunt, Jake answered, having convinced himself thoroughly via reflection and a subsequent discussion. All right. Their platform was made visible, and they just stood there for a while and waited. Soon, Sanctodomo to one side and Saya to the other side also became visible. Jake looked towards Jacob, who returned his gaze, and Jake threw him a questioning look. Jacob smiled as he mouthed the word treasure. Jake smiled and subtly nodded. He wasn't surprised at all. He had expected Jacob and the Holy Church to either want treasure hunt or the town defense one. Town defense because they were the largest city Jake knew of, and treasure hunt because they had a living cheat with the power to divine where valuable things could be found. As Miranda had noted, high city populations weren't necessarily that big of an advantage. This event would only be for the elites, no matter what. 3 months seemed like a long time, but one had to remember that D-grade wasn't that easy to reach. Neil and his party were all regarded as powerful experts, yet he couldn't promise they would all reach D-grade before the deadline. One by one, all the platforms became visible. No one stepped forth right away to voice their opinions, but instead waited patiently for the entire hall to be ready. This vote was a bit different from all those prior. This vote wasn't one that truly concerned the trade managers or even political figures. It was a decision only those who had reached D-grade or had the confidence to be D-grade by the deadline should really be involved in making. As the silence permeated the room, Jake soon noticed that most were looking up towards him and the platforms to his side, waiting for them to start it. Something they didn't get a chance to do, as one of the few factions nearly entirely based on combat spoke first. "The Court of Shadows proposes we vote for the singles tournament," Caleb said. Many frowned across the hall, but Jake's brother didn't give them time to comment before he came with his explanation. "Properly establishing the power rankings of the strongest on Earth will surely be a valuable thing, and will allow the strongest to battle each other in relative safety. From my understanding, as long as you surrender, you won't die, and the system has a tendency to heal people as they exit trials, so this would allow us all to go all out and best learn from each other. Additionally, the tournaments differentiate themselves by a winner being guaranteed, and hence bountiful rewards being guaranteed. In all other events, we may get unlucky and end up with nearly nothing if we fail to complete enough of the event." Even more frowns filled the room, and many glances were also thrown towards Jake and the sword saying. Everyone knew that either the old man or the masked man would win if the tournament were to begin here and now, and chances were that dynamic wouldn't change unless either of them began slacking off. As to why the court would choose to vote for the singles tournament when they didn't have a winner on their team, it was something even Jake could quickly figure out. First of all, Caleb believed Jake would likely win, and secondly, while the court wouldn't win, they would probably have a few good placements. Assassins tended to be quite good at 1-versus-1 fights, after all. "Would it not be equally valuable to know which city ranks the highest?" a female voice sounded out from the platform with the undead. "We proposed a town defense event to help cities and experts prove they can truly defend their citizens, while at the same time allowing us to work together and form stronger bonds among our fellow Earthlings and alliances. If we fear missing out, would it not be an idea for some of the top settlements to group together? Haven, Sanctodomo, Saya, Midgard, Skirvin. If such cities banded together, wouldn't we surely be able to lay claim to the best the system has to offer by putting our best experts together?" And thus another long discussion began. Chapter 19. World Congress. Challenge. If one called the discussions for those damn materials heated, the vote where herbs truly was the only worthy choice, then the current discussion revolving around the sister event was absolutely blazing. At least many cities had needed some of the same materials, plus the angle of potential trading. It meant that there had been a strong desire for consensus. However, for this vote, everyone went straight for what played into the strengths and desires of their own city. The undead wanted town defense, or city defense really, for several reasons. First of all, Jake had the feeling they were quite good at defensive stuff. Heck, Casper had an insanely defensive class and profession combo, and as the undead had many enemies throughout the multiverse, it made sense they had developed many means when it came to defensive battles. On top of that, they had the angle of teaming up with other powerful cities. It would give them 10 days to prove they were valuable allies, and form strong alliances. They were clearly desperate to form at least some strong alliances, or even defensive pacts, to offer them some protection. During their chat, Casper had briefly mentioned that sometimes the Risen in new universes got wiped out on the planet quite quickly, as they were seen as undead abominations, filthy creatures to be purged. Jake thought it was just silly prejudice and bigotry. Being somewhat dead didn't make one any less of a person. People tended to fear what they didn't know, so being put in an environment with them for 10 days to work together and get to know each other would allow humanity to become more adapted to their existence. As has been said, the best way to battle bigotry is to actually get to know those you were bigoted against. So their angle made a lot of sense. Meanwhile, Midgard really advocated for the dungeons, as in really hard, though they did say they could also support the group tournament. It was pretty damn obvious that their city had many powerful parties, or perhaps the leader was just a selfish guy in a powerful party. The Sword Saint seemed intrigued at the dungeons, but his faction appeared the most open-minded out of everyone in the top 10. He looked confident in handling anything, which kind of made sense. He had a powerful faction and was also strong as an individual. No matter what they ended up doing, they would end up on top, which was why their next move made a lot of sense.
The Noboru clan is open to negotiations for our votes. All 4 cities worth,
one of the people on the Sword Saint's platform said. It was the guy Jake assumed to be the city board, and he also looked related to the old man, which he 100% assumed they were, since they were from the same clan and all. The declaration threw the entire hall for quite a loop. The Noboru clan was behind 1/10 of the total votes, making their offer quite enticing for everyone. Yet, surprisingly enough, the first response wasn't someone trying to get the votes, but denouncing them.
To openly sell your votes like that, have some shame.
It was one of the lower-ranking cities, one Jake couldn't even remember speaking up before. Actually, there were a few cities that had barely talked, if at all. The Aaron guy and his city were one of them, though the 2 people with him did go around doing stuff during the intermissions. Jake had to admit that it seemed a bit corrupt, if that was even the right word, to just pretty much put their votes up for sale like that. Then again, who really gave a shit? And weren't these political discussions pretty much just selling votes and promising stuff for benefits? People just tended to be more subtle about it.
Oh? What does your clan want in return?
The woman from the undead faction asked, completely ignoring the complaint. The man from the Noboru clan frowned a bit, but responded nevertheless.
Such things are better discussed in a smaller setting. The Noboru clan will abstain from the discussion until an opportunity to talk more closely with the interested factions presents itself.
From there, the entire discussion kind of spiraled, as Jake came to learn that most factions honestly didn't care about what event was chosen, while those that did care were just very vocal about it. What they did care about were gains they could get from others for their vote. After an hour of open discussion, people began spreading out. Negotiations became face-to-face and behind closed doors. The first thing Jake did was to go over to Jacob and confirm that the Holy Church did indeed intend to vote for the treasure hunt. One could only confirm so much with mouthed words and questioning glances.
Yeah, we discussed it and agreed on the treasure hunt being the best, Jacob explained. There are several reasons for this, but the primary one is that we feel it fits our strengths the most.
We're in agreement then, Jake smiled. How do you feel the chances are to lock it down?
Quite good. With our and Haven's votes and a few of the allies we have already made agreements with, we are close. If we manage to secure the votes from the Noboru clan, I believe it is pretty much secured.
There you're moving then, Jake said, as he and Jacob together went towards the Noboru clan. Miranda had already gone over to one of the other top 10 factions, who seemed indecisive. Neil hadn't hesitated to go straight to the other space mages present to keep discussing their teleportation circle network. In retrospect, it had been an excellent move to bring him. Miranda deserved a pat on the back for that one. When the city lord of the Noboru clan saw Jake and Jacob approach, he quickly finished up with the one he was currently talking to and engaged them, completely ignoring the undead woman who stood to the side already waiting her turn. Jake had to admit, her level of patience and tolerance was impeccable. He didn't even see her react to the blatant disrespect. She did do something, though. She motioned backward towards Casper to have him come over. Jake saw his old friend wince a bit, but once he saw Jacob and Jake also there, he relented and made his way over. Those two may as well come along, Jake said, nodding towards Casper and the undead woman. Would make negotiations a bit easier just to have everyone present. Don't you agree?
All right.
The Pokerouge City Lord clearly disapproved, but still allowed them all to go up to the platform. However, he did throw out one comment just as he obscured them from outside view. A comment heard only by the four of them and the sword saint who sat inside with his eyes closed.
I didn't think the Holy Church usually associates with the undead.
His words didn't seem that bad on the surface, but the meaning behind them was clear. He wanted Jacob to denounce them, take his side, and make them leave again. Jacob was ready, however. I cannot choose the associates of my friends. If the progenitor wishes them present, then neither the Holy Church nor I have any right to tell him to make them leave. That we happen to interact through him is simply unavoidable. Jake nearly wanted to choke as he heard that explanation. Oh no, I am not here with the undead heathen. I am here with my friend who happens to be with an undead heathen, and if I happen to be friendly with the undead heathen, it is just to play nice with my friend. To Jake, it was total BS. But Jake could empathize with Jacob's position. He couldn't openly say that Casper was his friend due to the Holy Church and their stance on the undead. It honestly sucked. Who cares? Jake asked, shaking his head. We're all just earthlings and mortals. Why care that someone has another eye color and a bit better death affinity? Sure, it was oversimplified, but he really didn't give a shit. Heck, his best friend was a snake, and his two other good friends were birds. Oh, and his kind of niece was the cutest baby hawk. Well, soon-to-be teenage hawk. I meant no offense, the city lord said, looking a bit embarrassed. Clearly not by his actions, but Jake's reaction. He was that kind of guy. On the other hand, the undead woman made a huge smile as she went over and bowed deeply towards Jake. She then extended her hand to shake, being a bit too obvious as he looked straight down her cleavage. I am Priscilla, and it is an honor to finally meet the progenitor and Viper's chosen face to face, she said, her eyes looking deeply into Jake's. No matter how ignorant Jake was at times, even he could pick up the apparent signals in her shameless flirting. Sadly for her, Jake wasn't interested. He grabbed her hand and shook it. Jake Thane, nice to meet you too. I heard a lot about you from Casper. Indeed he had. Casper had spent a lot of his recounting of becoming undead and the rest of his time in the tutorial talking about her, about how insufferable she was, and how she had tried to honey trap him all the damn time, even when he already had a girlfriend. She had even flirted just as they went to the World Congress. Only good things, I hope, she answered, her smile only growing. Sure. That made her smile fade a bit. As for why he used his name so openly, despite hiding himself with a mask throughout the entire World Congress, it was because he saw no reason to hide it. In fact, he preferred if people knew who he was. It was already known that Caleb was his brother, of course, and by extension, it would be easy to figure out who his parents were. With his brother around to defend them, he didn't fear that they would suffer any harm. He actually believed that the knowledge of not only pissing off the Court of Shadows, but him too, would serve more as a deterrent. And as sad as it was to admit, Jake hadn't really been close to anyone in the pre-system world other than his family and colleagues. He had more friends and comrades now than before. Miranda, Hawkeye, Misty, Sylphie, Millie, etc. All were new friends he had made after the system. He also still had Casper and Jacob, whom he considered friends. All of these had in common that everyone already knew he was close to them and or could take care of themselves. However, most importantly, he didn't really have any cool nickname. Sure, some called him the Hunter or just Hunter, but he didn't really want to be called that all the time, as a hunter wasn't as unique as an augur, judge, sword saint, or other cool names like that. Yes, Jake was a tiny bit jealous. Well, he was sure he would get a cool one in the future, and he did kind of have progenitor, but introducing himself as the progenitor would just be weird. It would be like introducing himself as the prodigious arcanist or another of his titles. Also, what if he got a better title in the future? Would he have to switch it up then? Way too much work. Jake Thane worked just fine. Anyway, back at the negotiations that Jake had just made damn awkward, Jacob was luckily there to pick up the slack. Casper just snickered at Jake's response, as Priscilla looked scornfully back at her undead comrade, still containing a touch of her coy demeanor. Yep, she is an S-tier gold digger, or influence digger, blessed by a primordial digger. Both Jake and Haven, as well as the Holy Church, are interested in the treasure hunt event, And we naturally hope for your support in this endeavor, Jacob said, leaving the other side open to voice their requirements.
I am sure we can figure something out, the city lord Isaiah said. I believe the Holy Church has much to offer, information being one such thing.
I am listening, Jacob replied, as they slowly began talking. There was plenty of time, so Jake did some negotiating of his own. Jake walked over, took a seat on one of the chairs, and looked at the Sword Saint, who had now opened his eyes and regarded him.
What do you want? Jake asked curtly. What makes you think I want anything in particular? The Sword Saint asked in return, raising his eyebrows. Because people like us always have something we want, and you look just as bored being here as I do.
Jake had observed the old man enough to see his impatience. They were both here for similar reasons, too. Jake had come to reconnect with his family and friends and support Miranda, while the Sword Saint had come here to support his clan. The old man smiled and chuckled a bit.
What are you offering?
I'm an alchemist, Jake answered, summoning 3 bottles, a health, mana, and stamina potion, respectively. Jake knew from Miranda he couldn't actually hand them over in here. He had tried to have Casper give him some small thing from his own spatial locket, and Jake had found himself unable to deposit it. Chances were the system wouldn't allow anyone to trade any material goods during the World Congress. A bit sad, honestly, as Jake would have loved to give his pals and family some good potions. The Sword Saint's eyes sharpened as he looked at the bottles. He picked one up and observed it more closely, even opening another to take a whiff.
Certainly better than any made by our resident alchemists or pharmacists. However, while I am interested, I am unsure what the point is in offering such things to me personally. I am not the one you have to convince.
This was clearly in reference to the city lord, who looked wholly absorbed in his discussion with Jacob. Are you saying that if you say to vote for something, he won't listen? Jake asked. From how the city lord had constantly looked at the Sword Saint for approval, Jake was quite clear he didn't have it wrong.
Even so, my personal wants and those of Saya are 2 separate entities, he answered, shaking his head.
How so? Your success and power mean more power to your faction. Your death or stagnation is a loss or could possibly lead to the collapse of your entire clan. It was becoming clear that they had a bit of a fundamental disagreement about how things were supposed to work.
You look at it far too simply. To lay everything on this old man is not the way. The Nabaru clan is not strong because I am strong. We are strong together. I am merely on a sword. Nothing less, nothing more.
While I admire that mindset, will a dulled sword be enough for you to stand on top when you refuse to invest in bettering yourself? Jake asked, looking the Sword Saint straight in the eye.
I guess time shall tell, he answered, with another shake of the head.
Either way, that is another reason I say go for the treasure hunt. Dungeons or the town defense one will not allow us humans to spar. The tournaments will be structured and annoying, and who is to say the format will even allow those who wish to battle to meet? No, the treasure hunt is the only open event where we can all meet. At that time, let's see who wins. Jake looked challengingly into the eyes of the saint. Me or the Nabaru clan? With those words, Jake just exited the barrier. Both Jacob and the city lord watched him leave with puzzlement on their faces. Jake hadn't gotten to negotiate for anything, but just left. Still, he felt like the Nabaru clan would vote for the treasure hunt. The big smile on the old man's face and the way he'd shaken his head at Jake's audacity were the sources of his confidence. No matter how much he talked about doing everything for the clan, he wanted to know who was strongest just as much as Jake. Chapter 20. World Congress. Master Negotiator. Okay, Jake did fuck up one thing during, or after really, the discussion with the Sword Saint. Jake liked walking off after getting the last word in, as he felt it was the easiest way to come out on top of a discussion, and because it halted any future arguments. This resulted in Jake leaving behind 2 undead with no one really talking to him, as Jacob and the city lord were already doing their own thing. It wasn't like he could walk back in either, both because the barrier blocked him, but more importantly because that would be totally uncool. Luckily, Casper didn't want to be in there either and also walked out. Priscilla followed a few moments later, looking quite conflicted, perhaps wondering if she should have stayed or not. In the end, she seems to have decided to go with the city that didn't either openly hate the undead or show bigotry towards them. When Jake saw them following, well, he decided that he might as well also get them on board. With them, the treasure hunt would be damn near insured. He would also go by Caleb and do as any good big brother would. Use their familial relation to convince him to go with treasure hunt by bringing up old memories, like how Jake always allowed Caleb to use the good controller. Anyway, the undead faction wanted the town defense event because it would allow them to form better relations with other factions of Earth. Jake felt like as long as he could alleviate their fear of humanity suddenly banding together to wipe out the evil undead, they would be more open to voting for the treasure hunt. Jake felt pretty sure about his assessment, but it was always good to confirm. He went up to Casper and asked, "You guys want the town defense mainly to make humanity less assholish towards the undead, right?" He said it as straightforwardly as he could.
Yep, Casper answered with a shrug. Can't see most of the others doing anything good for our image. Could you imagine if we actually did well in the tournament and got a good reward? The righteous crusade to wipe out the unclean would be just around the corner if that happened. It would have nothing to do with just wanting to take our stuff. Not at all. People like justifying their own shitty behavior. Nothing new